Hello and welcome to Mandibil, and this time I'm actually living up to my name, which in Danish is Mandibil, which is in English would be something like man in a car. And this is the sort of the name I came up with. Very, very clever name. Back in 2015 when I started this channel, and 212 subs later, we are here in 2022, and 212 hardcore philosophy interested subs. I find that to be actually a decent statistic, although I might like, rounding up around 1,000. That's sort of a magical limit. 1,000 subs, like, I don't care about 100,000, I will never get that far. But and there's something you could monetize things on YouTube, as far as I understand, and so not that I'm not into the money as such. I'm not making a living out of my philosophy like some other philosophers who are sort of dependent on their thinking in order to make their living, which is sort of an academic approach to philosophy, right? Stefan Molyneux, Bernardo Kastrup, right? So I know that's a guy like maybe Bernardo Kastrup. He has sort of possibly a war chest of being a CEO of a big company. He has possibly 10 million, at least $1 million in his account, right? He has just saved up and saved up and saved up, possibly. And now he's saying, okay, I'm going to live off of this for the rest of my days, and I'm going to work for Essentia executive officer, whatever, in Essentia Foundation, right? And Stefan Molyneux, he's ready to, maybe not the money anymore, because as far as I can see on his Bitcoin account, he is a multi-millionaire, right? Possibly ending up being a billionaire on cryptos, right? So he doesn't have to work for a living, but he's not going to have nothing. He's not going to sit in his sofa the rest of his days. So he's going to do something, and that's what he's doing basically now, right? On his free domain, he's just sort of pseudo work in order to keep things going and pretending to do philosophy, while he's sort of, okay, I don't need to do philosophy anymore, right? And he's also been banned from all sorts of platforms and so on. So he's going into novel writing. I think I prefer he do novel writing rather than doing philosophy. Not that I'm interested in his novel writing, but his philosophy is so bad that I would say that the world is better off him not doing philosophy. And novels are less harmful, right? So I would say, if you want to be a free market kind of, I wouldn't even say it's a free market. It's a completely free, independent philosophy. You need to do it in your spare time, right? Because then you're not dependent on whatever you're saying. You don't have to be wedded to anything, right? You can change your mind, and it doesn't hurt your business, so to say, right? Because it's not connected to a business of any kind or any. I mean, at most you could, lose face, right? Or what's it called? Lose face. Come across as an idiot, or right? So sorry, I was wrong about this. I have to change my philosophy, and people might think, okay, he hasn't got a clue, something like that, right? But that's the worst thing that can happen. That's the worst thing that can happen, is that, okay, I guess I was wrong, and now I can argue better, and I can point out from my new argument why the old argument was worse, right? Sort of an anti-sophist approach to arguing, not like, Stefan Molyneux all of a sudden, who was licking the ass of Christianity out of nowhere, and licking the ass of Orange Man out of nowhere, right? And arguments like, well, you have to improve your thinking, or you have to grow up and become something like that. Stupid arguments like that, for why he's all of a sudden sort of halfway in one camp while still being in the old camp, right? That's pure sophistry, nothing to do with philosophy. And if we are talking about this politics and Christianity thing with Stefan Molyneux. What I think is going on, and that's on my account, right? I'm just I'm trying to figure out why people do certain things, and the only thing I can come up with is his daughter. He changed his mind like 4 or 5 years ago, right? When Orange Man came in, changed his mind, quote, right? And that must have been around when his daughter was close to getting into sort of teenage years, right? Or, not teenage years, puberty. And getting sort of starting to be a grown-up, right? And from judging from the talks that she has had on his show, she is into politics and claimed that she's been that for a while. So him doing homeschooling with her, explaining all sorts of stuff, right, has made her a Christian statist, right? How does an anarchist, atheist, homeschooling his child, who then becomes a Christian? I'm not saying that I know that she's a Christian, right? But I would guess, because mommy is sort of Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, something like that, right? So he's too much simp in order to say, well, I'm still an anarchist, and no, he has to halfway simp for the women in his family, because now it's 2 against 1, right? 2 Christians against 1 atheist, and possibly 2. He has said in a podcast in way back that he's went to voting with his partner, right? His wife, because she liked to vote. So she's a statist, right? So now it's 2 statists / Christians against 1 atheist anarchist. That's so he's afraid that mommy might destroy the family if he doesn't concur with so he's simping for them, right? That's the only thing I can see. He doesn't take anything but his family seriously. He doesn't care about callers, he doesn't care about philosophy, doesn't care about anything like that, only insofar as it works towards his own personal gain and his own personal psychology to some extent, right? Which my discussion with him on Metaphysics a couple of weeks ago, the so-called free domain metaphysics debate, showed clearly that he's not interested in philosophy. So the only thing I can see is because his daughter turned out to be a statist Christian, right? So now he has to bridge that gap between atheism and Christianity, and anarchism and the Orange Man, right? So he's sort of betting on all horses as far as he can, right? That's never going to work. Only stupid people are going to take him seriously now, right? But I don't know why I got into that rant, but he just freaks me out. He triggers me, the idiot Stefan Molyneux, right? And maybe it's because I did listen to him a lot, 7 or 8 years ago, because he was actually, believe it or not, the inspiration for me to start philosophizing. So I had to give him that, right? But it's like Aristotle suddenly waking up from the mysticism depths of Plato and starting his own academy, right? Or what was it called? Elysium, something like that. Aristotle's academy, right? Because Plato was crazy, right? So when you sort of grow into your own as a philosopher, you sort of start to criticize your masters, right, or your mentor. Is he crazy, right? Because if he's crazy and I believe him, I'm doing crazy stuff, right? So I'm sort of Aristotle in that sense, right? So it just triggers me. Also, as I said, maybe because I sort of was a bit of a fanboy at some point back in the day before I started to really being able to philosophize, standing my own ground. So it pisses me off even more that I was not smart enough to figure out his bullshit, right? Okay, but what I was actually going for was sort of along the lines of metaphysics, right? And there's sort of a huge problem I might mention also that I had planned a debate with a guy I found on the internet discussing metaphysics on some other channels. I sort of started a discussion with him, and we were planning a debate this weekend, and then he had to do something else. I don't know if it was a sort of a half-assed excuse for actually not doing it, but then he made an update on Twitter that sort of reeked of Christianity, and I asked him directly, well, do you consider yourself a Christian? And he said yes. And I said, okay, then I don't think we are going to have this metaphysics discussion, right? Because I don't like philosophy that is poisoned with religion, right? Or religion that is poisoned with philosophy, whatever, however you want to turn it around, right? Because then you are in a confirmation bias situation, right? And I don't like that. I don't like somebody who's good at manipulating words in order to, blue stamp religion by using some kind of metaphysics or, and that's a point I want to get across first of all, which is when you are realizing that what we could call the idealist approach, and I'm not sure about these terms anymore, right? But let's just say if we have the materialist and then we have the idealist version of metaphysics, these two groups of metaphysics, which are, you could also say, the analytic and the sort of continental way of, where I'm the continental Immanuel Kant type, right? Sort of a dichotomy, you could say. And the problem is that those who have a religious background or have been indoctrinated and mentally destroyed by religion, and have to find some way to justify this stupid thinking, right? Which is not thinking actually, but it's just, do as you're being told, right? From childhood, they have to justify it in order to justify the parents doing whatever they did to these children in order to make them conform to this shit, right? So it's very likely that there are a way larger proportion of religious people in the idealist spheres of things, right? You would possibly find a lot of, let's say, naturalists, scientists, and so on in the materialist metaphysics, while a lot of woo-woo people in the idealists. So this is sort of the situation I find. I'm sitting there on the fence looking at both camps and saying there's a lot of crazy people in both camps, right? And how do you figure out which, right? Now, you might have to look at how they got, if they have switched over the fence, so to say, right? Have they gotten from idealism into materialism, or from materialism into idealism? And I think it's safe to say that if religious people tend to start off as in idealism, then those are people who are rejecting religion, are stepping into materialism. Just like, Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Rationality Rules and these types of dudes, right? Cosmic skeptic, right? They become militant materialists, right? In order to reject religion. And then there's the other way around, right? Like me, for instance, starting out in materialism and figuring out there's actually something that doesn't work here. There is a problem. There is a contradiction or a paradox built into my thinking. So how do I explain this? Well, then what you could call idealism, or at least something that is closer to idealism, is a better explanation of this, right? So if you want to figure out if people are crazy or not, right? Try to look at if they have switched from one to the other, right? That's likely to be the best, because they are at least able to figure out there's something not correct here, right? There's something that is not right. I have to figure it out, right? And that's possibly the best step. And I would say personally, not because I did that step in that direction, but people going from materialism into idealism, they might be the ones who are actually closest to good thinking, right? Because they realize that materialism is also flawed, right? Or the metaphysics in it, it's based on. And then look at how they were raised. Were they raised in a sort of a statist environment? Were they raised in a sort of a religious environment? Or anything like that, right? I was not in either. My parents, my father was sort of interested in sort of what could he gain from certain politics, right? So he was into those who would give him money, right? So he's sort of, philosophically corrupt, right? Morally corrupt in that sense, I would say. But it's a system that is, in order to get around in this coercive system, you can't avoid the state. It doesn't matter what you do. The state is around every corner, right? So you have to you float in air and live off of dew and insects in order to not be, and then they'll start to tax insects, right? So it's like you can't avoid the state, but that doesn't mean that trying to, instead of, it's sort of, if you can't beat them, then join them, right? So people would say, okay, if I'm not delving into politics, somebody else will do it and do something that make it even worse for me. So I have to make sure that other people are not voting for themselves against me. So I have to make sure that the money also goes in my direction, right? So that's the dilemma of statism, is most people will not reject the state because they will feel that then they are completely powerless. At least if they are supporting their own kind, at least they will get that benefit, right? So it's hard for people to become real, true sort of anarchists. And if they are anarchists from a political standpoint, it's very likely they will jump back into politics whenever some dude or dudess comes along who is sufficiently on their side, right? Like Ron Paul, for instance, right? Then anarchists will jump on Ron Paul. So it's like, how did these people, the person I would think that if I could speak sufficiently, whenever I'm going to do some kind of debate on metaphysics with another person, I would sort of inquire into how did they get to their stance, or did they have another stance before that, and how were they brought up philosophically, let's say, right? And then I will use that as a sort of foundational first impression of where they're coming from, right? Because metaphysics basically is wiping the slate clean. And you can't all of your thinking and decisions must be based on some kind of metaphysics and knowledge, right? And in order to do knowledge and metaphysics, you have to not say, I already know something, or I already have an insight, because that's why you're doing metaphysics, in order to establish how you get that. So you can't have anything given to you before you start philosophizing about metaphysics, right? So these sort of given things that people bring into their metaphysics is a red flag, because they need to connect the dots in a certain direction, right? So if they're bringing in religion, Well, it's because they're using metaphysics in order to justify whatever religious bullshit they feel they have to support or live in or be true to, or whatever term they're using, right? So it's I would think that at least 95% of all metaphysicians or people babbling in metaphysics, they're basically trying to justify whatever they already are forced to believe, right? It's what they're already having to believe. I have to take what they're already having to believe, and that's why it's a good idea to sort of step back and sort of, without being, you're just asking nicely, well, okay, did you ever change your mind about metaphysics, and how did you start out, and what were your parents like in this regard, and so on, sort of on a friendly term. But then you get an idea of where they're coming from and what incentives they might have. And I would say, unless they have the incentive, I want to find the fucking greatest metaphysics there is. It has to hang together. Then they're basically having a different agenda, and then you should be careful, right? In my opinion. Okay, that's what I have today. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.